Hello, I'm Michelle Haj-Broussard from the University of Louisiana at Lafayette, and this is Immersion Essentials Classroom Management. Part 1, the basics. So the first thing I want you to think about is what percentage of this scenario is the teacher's responsibility. So here's the scenario. A student is having trouble at school. The teacher writes home. The parents say they'll work with the child, but there is no change. The student begins to fall behind, and the teacher contacts the mother. The mother says she will help, but her help doesn't seem to be affecting the child's behavior at all. The child becomes more and more disruptive. The teacher and the parents are frustrated until the situation escalates and the child is suspended. So in your mind, start to think of what percentage of this scenario is the responsibility of the teacher. And write it down or just think of it in your head. And I'm going to give you a second to do that, and then we're going to talk about it. So what I want you to take away from this classroom management and immersion session is that the more that the teacher takes responsibility, the better chances that she's going to have a better situation in terms of classroom management in her classroom. The more that the teacher gives herself the power. So you have a sphere of control, a sphere of influence, and a sphere you can do nothing about. What often happens in terms of classroom management is the teacher focuses on that sphere that she can do nothing about, or that sphere of influence, but where she does not focus is the sphere that she has complete control over. And so what I want to give you with this classroom management class is help with that sphere of control, because there are things outside that we have no control over, obviously, but what we do have control over is what we do within our classrooms, how we set it up, and that's what we're going to talk about. So I'm hoping that this classroom management and immersion presentation will serve to help to empower you so that you can truly work within your sphere of control. What I want you to take away from this scenario is that the more responsibility that you take for your class, the better your classroom management will be. So let's get started. So the first thing we're going to talk about is those immersion non-negotiables. The first is negotiation. That is our bread and butter. So how do we say things to students in a language they don't yet understand fully so that they can understand it? And that, if you did my Immersion Essentials intro, is about visuals, it's about gesture, it's about the tone of your voice. All of those things work together to help the children understand. So the next piece is integrating content throughout. So we always want to be thinking in immersion of a twofer. We want to make sure that we're integrating content and we're integrating language through everything that we do. And finally, the third thing is making sure that we're staying in the target language. So we have to stay in the target language. If the students are not understanding, we have to go back to that negotiation, right? The negotiation is where we get them to understand when they don't understand the words that are coming out of our mouths. So make sure that we stay in the target language and try to keep our students in the target language as much as possible. So what do we need for classroom management? We need rules, obviously. You have to have some boundaries for students. We need procedures so that they know how to do what we need them to do. And then we also need, of course, integration, that language and content piece, because we're immersion. We always have to do more. So we're going to start with discipline. Discipline is really the smallest piece of the pie. It is the part that is necessary, that you have to have, but it's not going to give you classroom management. It's going to help. You need it as a baseline structure. So you need to know the school and district discipline policy when you're making your discipline plan so that your plan does not conflict with that. You need to have a discipline plan that includes rules and consequences. And if you're struggling right now, you also want to add in behaviorism. So you want to add in rewards. All right. So many new teachers add in rewards. There is nothing wrong with that. It helps you to get your class going. And later, as you move forward, you can kind of reduce those rewards and help kids to want to behave intrinsically. But we're all about making it this time. So rules, consequences. So my plan is listen and follow directions the first time, don't interfere with others' instructions, and be kind and polite. My consequences, and here's where you really have to look at your district and school policy, because you want to make sure that your consequences don't conflict with the district and school policy. So mine at the time when I was teaching immersion were, you want to have a warning. I would either check on a checklist or I would give them a little stamp or I called it a tempera, but it was just like a little Post-it note with a happy face on it, right? And then when I took it away, that meant that was their warning. So that helped me, because otherwise I would never remember who I warned, and I would warn a kid like 6 times. Well, when you warn a kid 6 times, that means you have no discipline plan. So you want to make sure you have a way to warn them and that it works with you. Then I would have a timeout. Some schools don't want that anymore. So you need, again, district plan. Then I would take part of their recess. Never take all of their recess. They need recess. And there's so many recess hours, minutes that have been cut, that we want to make sure that they're getting out there and that they're moving, because some of the discipline problems we're having is because we're trying to get 6-year-olds to stay seated for 8 hours, which is ridiculous. So make sure they have recess, but go ahead and take a minute or two so that you can re-explain your discipline and what they did wrong to them. And then finally, I would also have notes and calls home. So there's 2 rules that I suggest that you avoid. The first rule is about raising your hand. I know this is a rule. It's often in the posters you see at teacher stores. Raise your hand before you speak. Raise your hand before you get up. To me, raising your hand is a procedure. I have never, in my over 15 years of observing teachers, ever seen that rule, if it's a rule, fairly applied. It's never fairly applied because it doesn't work fairly applied. Every time you break a rule, that means you have a consequence. So my question to you is, if you have a student who loves what you're teaching and loves you and is just so excited to answer the question that they just shout it out, are you going to take away their recess? Because if you're not, then you are not applying your rules justly if that is your rule, right? So if you let that child who is just so excited that he can't hold himself back to answer, and you don't punish him for answering, which you should never do, right? Why would you punish a child for being excited about learning? That just sets a bad precedent. So if you don't punish that child, if it's your rule, then the next child who's calling out or yelling or talking while you're talking and didn't raise their hand and you punish, you have just been deemed unfair teacher. You're the unfair teacher. So we don't want that as a rule. We want it as a procedure. And if we have it as a procedure, then we can remind the kids about the procedure. What is our procedure so that we take turns? We can't have 30 people or 20 people answering at once. What is our procedure? Our procedure is to raise our hand. So we can remind them of the procedure. I just don't think that it makes a good rule. The second rule that is often on those already made posters that you might want to copy is to respect. They'll use the word respect. So here in Louisiana, and I'm pretty sure in lots of other places in the United States, respect is not something that you give. Respect is not handed to you. Respect is something that someone else earns. So I can't give respect. That person has to earn respect. So you can't force a child to respect someone. You can tell them that they have to be kind and polite. And so I would suggest that you change any rules about respect to being kind and polite. Because being kind and polite, you can explain that's how we make friends, right? That's how we help people, being kind and polite. And that is something that students will understand. Forcing someone to respect someone else is impossible. Like, there are people I don't respect, but I can work politely with them, right? I can still be kind and polite to people I don't respect. So the idea of forcing someone to respect them is very much against sort of the cultural background, shall we say, of the United States. So change the rule. The next piece we have is adding in language. right? So now we have to add in language because everything is about language and content in immersion. So even in classroom management, you want to add in language. So here are some ideas where you can add in language into your discipline plan. So you have your rules, you have your consequences, you have your rewards. Consider having students act out the rules and the non-rules. So being kind of polite, not being kind and polite. They can do like a little scenario, a tableau vivant if you want. You can take pictures of those and put them next to the rules so that they will see the rule and then a picture of it so they understand it better. The next thing is you want to make sure you're using language that they understand. So sometimes rules and objectives, but sometimes rules are in a language that the students really don't understand. So going back to Immersion Essentials, we want to keep it simple and emphasize keywords. Same thing, keep it simple, emphasize keywords. And then the last piece, which we discussed a little bit in Immersion Essentials, is about taking those parts of speech and starting to use your code for parts of speech. So I have verbs verde, verbs vert. So my verbs are green. And then so I would have my verbs in my rules green. And then you can use other parts of speech coding later on. But I would start with the verbs because that's the action and that will help you with your example, non-example, and helping with the pictures and pulling out those keywords. You have the verb and occasionally you have negation. Those are the important parts of rules. So those are the ones that you will try to pull out with those parts of speech. All right, so here are my 3 easy pieces for classroom discipline. Have a plan, send it to the office, and send it home. Keep track of who breaks which rules, and have a weekly behavior grade for parents. So I usually had a clipboard with the students' names and the rule numbers and enough room so I could write a little note so that I would remember which rule they broke. I only had 3. And then I would try to write down quickly what happened so that I could remember when I was letting the parents know that they were having issues with this particular rule. And of course, the last piece is be consistent. And this is very, very, very important. Just like I said, I had to come up with a new procedure for myself for giving warnings, where I gave them some piece of paper, some tangible piece of paper that I could take away from them so that I could tell that they had had a warning. Otherwise, I was not consistent. I would give warnings, 3 warnings to one student, and then I would punish them 1 warning to another student, and then I would punish them. Again, that means I'm an unfair teacher. So you want to make sure that you're being consistent. Okay, so let's get to the biggest piece of the pie. Discipline is secondary. If you are constantly using your discipline plan, if you are punishing students a lot, then what really is happening in your classroom is you need to work on procedures. The real part of classroom management is procedures. So here are some things to consider when you're creating procedures for your classroom. What do students do? You want to think through it step by step. You don't want to just say, put your bag up, get your materials, and go to your desk. That is not step by step. So you want to really think of it step by step. The first thing is you walk over to where your bags go. You open it. You pull out these 3 things. 1, 2, 3. You take these 3 folders. You put them in the color coordinated box. 1, 2, 3. Then you walk to your desk. You take out your journal. You turn it to the next page. You write your name on it. And then you look up to see what is our daily work. That is step by step. So you want to step by step. You want to think of what is working and what is not working. I always tell teachers that you want to focus on procedures for times during the class where it's not working. Something's not working, you need a procedure. All right? And lastly, you want to think, of course, how do you use language? How can language be infused into this procedure? I'm going to give you a few procedures, ones that I really feel are essential to have. So the first procedure is sort of your morning or daily routine when the students enter your classroom. If you're secondary, that's going to be during a period. If you're elementary, it's probably going to be in the morning. So the students walk into my room, they put their book sacks on a hook, they take out their folders. I had 3 folders, they were different colors. They put their blue daily folder in the blue box, their red behavior folder in the red box, and their yellow homework folder in the yellow box. Then the students take 2 pencils, go to their desks, take out their daily journals, begin the board work. It's usually a word problem, a writing prompt, and a drawing activity at their assigned seats. I have all of my daily journals on a PowerPoint. I have those PowerPoints printed out where I can put them on Elmo if worse comes to worse. So I have a backup scenario. Other students, I have certain students who do morning tasks. So they know once they have their journal out, they do their morning task and then they go to their journal. After announcements, we have circle time and they're going to come and sit in order. We have a daily order of who sits where and who gets out of their seat first. So that is my morning procedure. So morning procedures or entry procedures are very important. The next thing that's really important is procedures within the lesson. And a lot of teachers don't think about what they're doing during their lesson, but you need to have procedures as you teach. So when I'm teaching, I usually will model whatever it is I want them to learn. And I'm going to model it myself. I'm going to have a student come up and model with me so that they can see modeling as partners as well. Because the next step, as I'm scaffolding, is partners. So I'll have them work with a partner. And then after they work with a partner, I usually go around with a colored pen and I will put a little check next to the work to make sure that it's done correctly. And then they will, once they have the check for the 2 problems I've asked them to work with a partner, they will then start their independent work. That allows me during the partner work to work with students who are having issues. So during the partner and the independent work, I can circulate and correct answers with my little check. Then you have to have a routine of what they do when they're done. You have to have a routine of how you're passing out work, how you're picking up work. Is it in their desks? Are they getting it out? Then you're going to have a transition procedure where you're like getting out your math book. We have 10 seconds. Now, if you're in kindergarten, it's 10 seconds. If you're in 8th grade, it's going to be counting by 9s, right? And then you want to make sure you have the routines for that. My other suggestion, which is not on the slide, but it's a really good suggestion, is if you have independent work, always have early finisher work. Because you will have in immersion, in any class, a variety of students. And you're going to have students who go really quickly, what I call lapin. And you have students who are more methodical, what I call tortue. And so you want to make sure that you're meeting the needs of all of those students. So if you have a student who finishes early all the time, you want to make sure that you have something for them to do and don't make it be something that they hate. Because then you're going to have a lot of high achieving students who are going to underachieve. So early finisher activity, that's interesting. The other big area, and I will say this is probably the biggest area that I see problems with in immersion and in regular education, is transition. The lesson is going fine until the students have to move and do something else. At that moment, at those transitions, when they're coming in, when they're taking their books out, when they're moving one book in and moving another book out, any of those transitions, that's where things go wrong. So within the transitions, you always want to make sure that you have a procedure. So one of the easiest ways for procedures for students moving, so they're moving from your class to another class, one of the easiest procedures that I use, works with elementary, less so with older kids, is to number the students and then have them line up in number order. So if you have to line up students, you want them to line up in number order. So give them all a number and you can line them up. The good thing about this in terms of language and content is they will learn their number and the number of their friends if they're primary students. The other thing is you can start to play with those numbers. You can go number order, you can go backward number order, you can go even in number order first and then odd in backward number order afterwards. You can play around with it. You can ask for the prime numbers first. You can do all kinds of things with students once they have number order that integrates language and mathematics. The other thing that you want to do is to have some sort of transition when you're entering the classroom. I personally do the silent game. So the silent game is a listening activity. They come into my classroom, they put their heads down for 30 seconds, which gives me 30 seconds of peace and gives them 30 seconds of peace, which is fabulous. And they just listen. Once they finish, I take 1 minute after the silent game to write down everything that they have heard. So I let them just shout it out, everything that they have heard. And then we look and see what new things we heard. This is a listening game, so it really makes their listening more acute, and it gives you those 30 seconds you need to move from here to there to get out your folders to make sure everything is ready. The other thing for transitions that I use that's really easy to implement is counting. You want to make sure that you're counting at their grade level. Again, content integration. It makes no sense to count to 10 for a fourth grader. Fourth graders know how to count to 10. Fourth graders need to learn how to count by 7 and 6 and 8. Those are the multiplications that they have the most trouble with. So if you're counting, make sure that you're counting at grade level. You don't want to count in a way that is too easy for them simply because why? Why are you wasting that time? You know you need to count 10 times, but you can count by 7. You can count by 8 backwards. You can count by 25s. You can count with prime numbers. There are a bunch of different ways that you can count. There's no reason to count to 10 unless you're in kindergarten, then totally count to 10. All right, so those are my sort of 3 ideas for transitions that hopefully will help you out. And the counting transition is really easy. And the good thing about the counting transition is it has a deadline. So you never want to just say, okay, get your books out. And then you're sitting there waiting. And then you're going around asking them to get their books out. You're going to be saying, get your books out. We're going to give you 10 counts. We're going to start at 7 and we're going to finish at 70, counting by 7. 7, 14. And then somewhere around 49, you can kind of nudge them forward. So-and-so, can you help? We're almost there. Get that book out. So-and-so, get that book out. And let them start counting once they have their book out. So once they have done what you told them to do, they can count with you. So I also have some sort of basic procedures that you want to make sure you have implemented into your classroom. The first is assign seats. There is no reason for you not to assign seats, and often students have to sit in a certain place. So if they have an IEP, if they have something in their cumulative folder that says they need to be seated in a certain place, either at the front or the back or the side, it will tell you that in their folder. You need to make sure that those students are seated there. So what you can also do is start to seat students around them based on the behavior that you see. So that way you can make sure that you don't have your 5 most rambunctious students all together in the back of the class, which is what you will have if you don't assign seats. You also want to start with routines, the morning routine, the lesson, the transitions. Make sure you have those established. So you don't want to start with all your procedures at once. Start with your basic procedures. Then you want to focus new procedures on what is going wrong. So if something is going wrong in your classroom, imagine what it would look like if it were going right and what are the steps that students would be taking to get there. And then you're going to teach them that. And also keep in mind why students misbehave, right? Students misbehave for specific reasons, and we can make our procedures so that they're fulfilling some of those needs. So they misbehave because they want to gain power. Well, one of the things we can add in a procedure is some sort of choice. They can do this or they can do this. It's still your choice. It's teacher choice A or teacher choice B, but they have a choice. They also do it to seek attention. So you need to create in your classroom ways for students to get attention. One of the easiest ways is to teach via workshop. So you have smaller groups so that the students are working within a smaller group. They have math workshop, they have language workshop. It really works really well to help students gain attention. And then the last thing is to avoid failure. If you are consistently giving them scaffolding, feedback, and working in small groups so you can give them more one-on-one instruction, that's going to help them avoid failure. So if you're modeling and then they're working with a partner and then you're going around and checking, and if they're having issues with a partner, you bring them into a small group so that you can work with them, that is going to keep them from failing. So that is going to be very helpful. So those are the basics. All right, so the pieces that we're talking about for basic classroom management in immersion, number one is discipline. You need to make sure that you have rules, consequences, and rewards. Number two is an entry or morning procedure. That's going to move students from entering into your class, getting started working right away, and then finally starting to work with your instruction. We're also going to have a within the lesson procedures. So the within the lesson procedures, the big ones are moving from modeling to partner to independent, and then also having tiered lessons and having something for early finishers. That early finisher piece is very important in immersion. And then the last piece that we have for our classroom management in immersion basics is grade appropriate transitions. When you're moving them from one activity to another, from one place to another, you need grade appropriate transitions with time limits. I always suggest counting. You can do that from 0 to 1 for kindergarten. You can do that by 10s in second grade, or you can do that by 6s or by 7s in the later elementary grades. High school, try prime numbers. But the whole idea is you want the transitions to be grade appropriate. Thank you very much for watching Classroom Management Immersion Part 1, the basics. And Part 2 will focus more on procedures. So be sure to look at Classroom Management Immersion Part 2 so that you can get some really good procedures to help you in your classroom. Have a great day.